the Pagan, where we're going to talk about everything pagan. And I know so many of you have been asking to do spells or want more spells on the daily spell. So if I need you guys to go ahead and get me to those spells, and how can I do that? I need you guys to be forming them and sending them in to me. But we'll talk about that another time as we head for the crystal web and that energetic power. Tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit differently. I'm going to talk about pagans and power. I think it's a very important subject and one I've talked about before, but I don't talk a lot about now. In around 2010, 2009, 2012, we did talk a lot more in those days about pagan and pagan style power and what that was. And the conclusion was it was the idea that we were the dissent. We were the other that was so existing, and we existed with a lot of shadow power, which means we scared people, but we didn't have a lot of authentic power. But let's go ahead and begin to just start this discussion about pagans and power. First of all, pagans have a multifaceted, often difficult relationship with the idea of power. What do I mean by power? Power is the ability to influence and to carry out actions and executions on behalf of the individual. Very simple. Can you act and execute? Do you have the power or authority to do something? Power is literally the action to execute, be it in the energy of a cell, the power of food and chemicals, especially chemicals to break down the sugars and other things and turn that into energy so that you can move. That's a form of power. Power is the ability to apply and execute. So that is where it is. And human power, let's talk about human power. So, human power, according to Dr. Alvin Toffler, and I am a big Toffler fan. He had passed away a number of years ago. But he wrote the books Future Shock, Third Wave, Power Shift, War and Anti War, Revolutionary Wealth, and a lot of his futurist predictions, everything else. But he said power comes from the first violence. Your ability to inflict or have inflicting or to avoid violence is an essential part of power. No one likes to be hurt. No one likes to be in pain. So violence becomes our first method of controlling power. We see it in the animal kingdom. The males who fight and are aggressive do so sometimes in certain parts of tribes on certain types of animals in order to maintain their position for mating and food and other resources. Well, humanity was much the same way. It still is. Uh, there's this common theory. It was a really big theory in the early part of the century. Was that when you went amongst the more primitive tribes, the smaller the tribe, they didn't need government per se. They didn't need anything in the sense of structure because they would work things out. But once tribes got to around 500, the strongest would emerge, and there would be a group of people, human people, that would go out and basically begin to use violence to control the tribe and take more than their fair share, more than their own. And people would form governments or structures to counter this violence. So, violence is at the core, the ability to have violence or to participate in violence or to utilize violence is the first step of power, period. You see it with the police departments, the United States government, the city governments, the state governments, all claim to have the right to use violence against the citizens. And they're saying the citizens do not have that right against each other or with them. So that monopoly, the governmental monopoly of violence, is one of the things that makes a government a government. And as you say, well, gangs also utilize this idea of violence against governmental forms. So violence is the lowest form of power, the crudest form of power. And it's effective sometimes, but if you use too much, people rise up against it and they begin to establish their own systems. So violence is the lowest form of power, but it's an essential one. Pagans basically don't have that right. They don't have that ability. They don't use it very much, and they kind of disdain it, and they kind of say that they don't want to use it. And like a lot of good protest movements as we head towards Parliament, hi, Chad, that we don't want to use violence. So, one of the ideas behind it, one of the things, Gordon Peterson, which a lot of people dislike and have made him very right wing uh, object of it, says that a good man is not a weak man. In fact, a good man is a dangerous man who learns to control that their danger to others, and that they can use it to protect their tribe, their ability. And we have that class of warriors. We have that at festivals, the guardianships. Hi, Brenda. I see she waves. That sort of thing. So we have that sort of action of power. So we understand violence, and as pagans, we don't tend to want to use violence. The second form of the emerging is a story that the world's greatest story: money, wealth, resources. So if you have these resources, you can get people to exchange one set of resources for another, money for other things. So arrowheads, for meat. I'm a great maker. And this started some of the idea of specialization, some of the other skills. But if you had more resources than the next guy and you could trade them with them, you had power. You could also use it to hire people to do violence for you or to protect you from violence. So money enhanced violence and increased the ability to have more organized violence by controlling the resources. And also another way to trade and to get people on your side. So the energy of resources is very, very important. What do I mean? Food, number one resource. Water, number one resource. You can't have one without the other. You can't survive without it. Third number one order of that is air. You need enough oxygen, 21% oxygen and another mix of oxygen into your lungs. These are all forms of wealth. And there's a term even beyond that. That which you can control, you can handle, it's called hydraulic despotism. And what that theory is that whatever is the most difficult resource in your system or the most valued resource in the system, controlling that will actually give you control over society. Uh, in the Dune movie, it's spice, but in our world, it is oil. It's becoming increasingly clean air. It's becoming increasingly clean water. These aren't seen as public goods. These are seen as private goods with a public purpose. They haven't started taxing the air yet, but I'm not sure that they won't try and that we won't have a period of time where we will see air as different grades. So this control of wealth is very important. And for pagans, we're beginning to emerge into that with seeds, with land, with all sorts of things. And we're seeing better and better money managers. And I must say that that's an interesting thing. But as a whole, we've had a very poor relationship with money and resources and the idea of getting off the grid. So we wanted to live small and we're happier for it. I mean, so I'm a stoic, I'm a minimalist. So I understand that concept. The third, and this is where pagan power really comes from. This is it. So 8.5 minutes into it, it was knowledge. And this is shifting really much. The original concept of knowledge is that very few people could actually access witchcraft. The further you go back, the less really accessible in the way that we understand it today exists. There were covens, there were groups, there were families. Even my own tradition claims a history of more than 100 years of family to exist in. What a tale it is. And so do others. And so we have these family structures. And remember, that which you remember lives. So we try to keep our family traditions as lives as much as possible. Now, America stripped that idea. Let's be honest. America was the blender and the stripper. It was expensive to come over here, so we lost a lot of that sort of ties to this past, the psychometry of it, the touching, the feeling, I touched this, or it's my grandfather touched, and my great grandfather touched. Europeans have a lot of that. So do you see that in Africa, you see that in parts of Asia, but in America, and South America too, to a large degree, into the Americas as a whole, you don't see that depth of psychometry or the depth of touching and feeling that energy of objects. We strip it. To get into America, you stripped it. I mean, when you travel and you had a few pieces of cargo, when you travel across the United States, you strip it. When Don Lewis just moved out of Florida to come back to Dano, they stripped it. So time and time again, in America, we strip away these old generational items because they're too expensive to move, too expensive to participate in. We just say to transport. And America is very nomadic within itself. And so we're constantly buying new things to replace the old things. And with that, we're getting a new relationship that has little energy. So, yeah, there you go. But the next one is knowledge. Knowledge was hard to come by. And one of the best things about the early movement was there was apprenticeship. When I did it, when I found my first group, I had to find it. I found it through the occult bookstore. It took me a while, and I really hunted it. I really had to hunt it, and I found it was Temple of Sacred Stones by Lady Cole and Donna Cole Schultz, and it was fairly private. I mean, it was hard to find. But it was the beginning of them. I was already deep into that early '90s movement, the late '80s movement, where we were already beginning to come out of the broom closet. So groups were becoming public. Before that, it was even harder. So if you had witchcraft knowledge and you could prove it worked, whatever way it worked, and make a change in your life, you can get an apprentice. And that's how we transferred knowledge. It was much more expensive. And that exchange often was said not cash, but sometimes it was cash. Let's be honest, the cabins have done a really good job, and they ask for a great deal of cash, and their members willingly give it. And I have, and it's well worth it for their statuses. So they are, they do set a value to them, a higher value. But before them, there was the apprenticeship, and time is the most precious thing we gave. So you had to help out. You had to do the things, and you learned it. And there's other ways of learning it, but that knowledge was sacred. That knowledge was important. And that early '80s, '90s, thousands, we also saw other things like that, like Chinese medicine, acupuncture. When I was a child, was quack medicine, and you could possibly get arrested or sued if you participated. If somebody did acupuncture on you. Today, through that transformation, through that continued practice, people saw and did a great job. What happened? That specialized knowledge has now become coverable by insurance and now is moved into allowing other things like cupping and other sorts of Eastern medicine that is based on more on the chakras. You're starting to see Reiki sessions are starting to become insured. We're seeing psychology, which is also another one of those arts, start to emerge. So pagan knowledge, just sort of acting on knowledge, is where pagans earn their money, earn their income. And the problem is today that knowledge is becoming more and more commoditized. So it's still producing energy and money and this sort of thing, but it's becoming more and more commoditized, meaning it's more and more available to the general public, but the general public is growing. So we now need to do the sort of thing. So these are the three forms of power that Toffler talked about. And the question is, how comfortable are we with them? Are you comfortable with violence? I'm comfortable with the idea of violence. Could I commit violence? I have. I mean, I'm not going to kid myself. I've had under certain circumstances, never arrested, never committed assault, but I have had to do things that have put me into physical danger. I've had guns pointed at me more than once, more than I care to admit, um, for various reasons. Yes, people ask me. Once I was on the worm field. Oh yeah, I was warned against being in one of my worm fields, which was right next to a crack house. But that's a story for another day. Uh, I know it's true. But I've had guns pointed at me, so I understand I have a relationship with violence. I was an abused child. I went into the military. I learned about violence. So I have a relationship with violence. And I'm comfortable with understanding that. Can I use it? No. What am I going to use it for? For protection? Sure. I've been a guardian. As a paladin, I believe in it. But I don't utilize it to get my way. I don't use it to build power, but I do use it to protect the rights of others to commit their truths, their knowledge, their feelings. So let me talk about the last one now. So we've talked about Toffler's more definitions. Now I'm going to get into the other one. That's the other side of it. That's the other side of power that's emerging for today. Churchill said the next empires will be of the mind. We're seeing that emerge, and that is the management, and it's knowledge based. So under Toffler's system, this is knowledge. But how do we engage that now? So knowledge applied. You can know everything in the world, but if you tell nobody, what does it matter? I've heard this guy says, the grin says, cure cancer, tell no one. What a waste of energy and time and effort. But there are people like that. Or there are also people who believe that's exactly how we control knowledge. But actually, knowledge is growing at such a rapid pace, it's a matter of what you can stuff inside your head. And so the emotional, mental skills of imagination and curiosity in a day where even knowledge is being commoditized is important. So, where does pagan power come from? In exploring that imagination, by exploring their curiosity, to quantifying the unknown energy, to test the edge of the world, to work in the spiritual realms, to work where there isn't people there, and work where magic exists has always been where our power lies. And with that power, also now we're seeing it as we become more in number, we're seeing economic power of money. We also are seeing other things such as more people are teaching classes than ever before. If you think that you don't have enough teachers, oh my God, we've never had more teachers today. That's what my career started out. That's what Witch School was all about, is we didn't have enough teachers. So to give a different definition, when I started, we only did in-person teachings. It was only capable by going to a location and listening. And of course, they could have, and of course, we could use a telephone. We haven't had party lines, which was funny because they started out as party lines and then they got rid of them and then they brought them back and charged us for having party lines. Yeah, that's how it works. And we could do that. So we had telephones, we had meetings, we had coffee shops. We were one of the things that I think when you get into the baby boomers and the early X generation people, they really feel upset. One of the things that's most upsets them is the idea of the loss of those meetings. I will tell you, probably for 15 years, maybe 18 years, right? Maybe, probably late 80s, all the way up to the early 2000s. Everything was really physical. The internet was there. It became a useful management tool. And the first thing that it did is it grew everybody. We started seeing more people come out to physical events, more people participated. Remember in the 90s, I had a physical magazine. Recently, if you've gone to my Facebook page at Hubbard at facebook.com, you will see that I put up things about the Druid's Ring, and I've shown old pictures of older magazines. We did utilize modern technology of magazines, free magazines left in various locations, to hope the synchronicity of you looking for a group in Chicago wanting to do something and maybe wanting coming out for a ritual, that you would find this magazine at your favorite coffee shop or that. And in fact, we only produced a couple of hundred. I think the most we ever produced was one time. Ron Lochek gave us 1,000, paid and financed 1,000 copies for us to one time do it. But other than that, it was usually 200, 300 copies. But it was whatever we could afford that month. And so we had to hope on the synchronicity of it. Now you can search out for it. But because of the internet, because of COVID, because of Zoom, because of school, and because of other things, we saw more and more online power came in. So the knowledge of being online, first people in online gained a lot of knowledge authority, and they began to set up the next thing of power. So the last step of pagan power that has to be worked on is the idea of networking. Hi, Mary. Is the idea of and feel free to ask questions, is the idea of networking. And there are two forms of networking that we have to exist in. The first form of networking is that of person to person. The strongest network you have, or the weakest one, depending on this modern age, but the one that starts out is what? Family, blood relatives. What's added to that? Lifelong friends, people who you've set a bonded, committed relationship with. Who's beyond that? Those people you've supported and are supported in your energy. Hi, Mary. And hi, Mr. McBride. There we go. And that you're in that energy. So let's talk about the power structure. First and foremost is for a child, it's his parents. And if it doesn't have a parents, it's already in a very bad state. They might have a grandmother or another entity come and take care of them. But their first power is the protection of that parent. And if they don't have a parent, they have to have another entity. And sometimes in our history, we've just left them out to die if we didn't like what they looked like, if we didn't like what they wanted. And remember, children before 1950s, 50%, up to 50% of them died before they were 5 in so many cultures. And so children were early age children were very much fragile. But then that's where their protection came in. So a family had a family, and for a long time, family is what records, and today the family is still important. The family belongs to the tribe or the community, and that's everything that's physically around you. Today we have a market that created it before there are other systems. When you're at a festival where there is very little marketplace, you have to rely on each other. And those are the individuals you call. Who do you call when you go to the hospital? Who do you call to let them know you're in the hospital? Two different things. Who do you know, tell I'm in the hospital? And then who do you say, hey guys, I'm making announcements I'm in the hospital? Two different things. So that emotional energy is where the big bundle of it is. So the more people that feel attached to each other begins this process of family and resources. And this is at the heart of the Corellian teachings in a lot of ways. The great family. In fact, the more we have family, the more we can call family, the more that we can recognize family, the more we can communicate family, the better off we're going to be, because that builds another type of power that counters the violence, monetary, knowledge based one with an emotional based one. And this is the one that keeps getting shattered over and over again. This is the one true power that pagans have of making people feel loved, to act in love. And there are other cultures that do it. And I think this is what we carry to the parliament. But that when we build these love relationships, we get resources to do things. Obviously, we've demonstrated that over and over again. We can build things that are very large scale. We can do communication. We can do attention. We can do all of these things. But ultimately, the pagan power is in this power of love, this idea of the pagan heart, and find ways to connect with other people who have also these sort of lives. And when you get them to work together, and what I mean by work together, meaning they're in sync and sharing their emotions, doing their shadow work, willing to share a meal with each other, willing to engage in sort of energetic activity that lets the universe knows that they're happy and these people deserve to be happy and they deserve to have the resources necessary to make them even happier and build things. I'm a big believer in that. And now that I've stripped down, because I'm not doing the work of Witch School anymore. That's Lori Dedman is president. Lori Blackman, I believe, is assistant dean, and DJ, and all of those people are now doing that work. Now, I did it for a long time. As a co-founder, but now I'm not doing that work. I don't need to. Other people can do it. Um, the Karelian Nativist Church is now operating on itself, and that's primarily concerned with creating the churches and that sort of thing. And I'm not directly involved with that anymore. I'm on the board of directors, but I have no officer's position and everything else. I have my titles, but I don't have that. No, but now what I'm involved with, the power that I want to create for pagans, is I want to increase their resources, money, um, use media, the sort of emotional power that we're talking about, this power of attention, and increase our ability to communicate with each other and also to basically share knowledge, information. So by building on this knowledge-based organization, sharing more knowledge on top of combining it with which is very emotional, we're creating power of the mind, and the mind is going to be the next energy of the big world. We can talk about magic, but that's another game. That's psychology and everything else. But our knowledge of magic, our knowledge of connection, all of these other energies that we've got allow us to share. And when we share, we lower the need for resources. Money becomes less. Sharing is cheaper. If I can borrow your tools and you can borrow mine, we have to buy less tools. Or unless you've got two individuals in those households who are fanatical on each side, they will up the game to buy better and better tools. Let's see if you can lend them out to other neighbors. There's a lot of things we do as individuals, as consumerists, that we've been taught to. We all have to have a hammer, and it's good to have a basic tool set. But then we get the idea that everybody needs their own lawnmower. Not really. No, they don't. You just need one or two people with lawnmowers and you just pass it down. And it does so. There's a lot of things we can do to share to lower that monetary thing. There's a lot of knowledge we can share. But what we have to now do is begin to get into emotional and lifestyle energies. We have to bring people hope. We have to keep them looking at future, absolutely the opposite of the apocalypse. We are going to be here for a very long time. Man is just at the beginning of history, not at the end, no matter how much they try to convince us otherwise. We're the Dawn Star ancestors. We're about to see fire invented for the second time. I can go on all day with these types of ideas. And there's a truth to them because we're at the beginning of the millennia. When they look back, they go, 21, yeah, they'll look at the 2000s, like 2020. These someday will be ancient numbers. In just a few hundred years, they're going to look back here and they go, "Wow, that's ancient history." And our actions today will tell how our future turns out, how much they will remember us for our great legacies, for what we did. We have more leverage on it. So my last exercise here, and I believe in the Mobius strip. As you've heard me, we'll talk more about Mobius magic. One of the things I used inside the crystal web is Mobius magic that spins around. If you don't know what a Mobius is, it's pretty simple. Um, this is not. Yes, I'm going to take a piece of paper, right? And you take the piece of paper. That's pretty interesting. I'm going to just cut it for purposes for this. And you take it and you attach it. Now that's a circle. What if you did this? And as you can see, it's just one surface. I did this really poorly, but that's just one surface that runs on the outside. It's a Mobius. It's a self-contained item. And much of our magic is built that way. The crystal web is built that way. And we'll talk more about it. But as that Mobius goes around, that energy goes around, the more we can get that closed circle going, the better we will be, the more power we'll have, more authority. So we have this internal authority of ourselves. We're strong individually, so we have our willpower. We have our ability to think and to be that, to express ourselves. We now have the power of gaining resources. That's something we need to do better of. We have this knowledge. We have this sacred knowledge that allows us to do all sorts of things. And we have this emotional power, this power to make relationships, to heal, to truly heal the emotions. And that is the greatest power we've got, the ability to heal through love, through energy, through numerous methods, including modern science, through medicine, through herbalism, through all of these different systems. As we become knowledgeable, more energetic, more things like that, we learn that our genius, and we're all geniuses, we just have to find it. Our genius, that knowledge level, will protect us and save us in a day as more and more information becomes commoditized. So, with that thought, what is Pagans and Power? Power for pagans is gaining knowledge, gaining resources, defending ourselves against violence, but ultimately it is our ability to create family wherever we go, and to have more people included in our family, and it gets treated as such. If we can do that, then we have a chance at a very happy, long future. So, with that, Dawn Star ancestors, take a thought of being becoming one. And that is our show for tonight. Unless questions, three, two, one. Nope, no questions. Alrighty, and I want to thank everybody who's listened and will listen into the public. And if you're watching this, having to do a report on me, and I know it'll probably be around 2179. You want to ask why should I pay attention to the soul fart? Just remember, I'm talking at you. And if I did today, you could do tomorrow, even if it is 2179. Blessed be and night.